Welcome, everybody. My name is Christina Höppner, and I'm a representative here today of the ABLE Digital Ethics in ePortfolios Task Force. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on AI for portfolio feedback and assessment. The partners of today's webinar are ABLE, ePortfolios Australia, and ePortfolio Ireland, three organizations that dedicate their time, volunteer time, and conference time, and webinar time to talking about portfolios, progressing the idea of portfolios, having conversations around portfolios. So in order for us to be a community, yes, with three organizations, but we do have lots of crossover. And so it's always good to see people from different sub-communities participate in webinars. Our presenters today are members of the ISOP project team, Professor Dr. Sandra Rebholz, Professor Dr. Paul Liprecht, Alexander Gantikow, and we might also see Diplom-Ingenieur Fachhochschule Andreas Isking and Professor Dr. Wolfgang Müller later on. So I would like to invite everybody now to take a seat. For many of you, it is still early morning, and let's listen first to see what the ISOP project has been researching over the last couple of years, where they are up to right now, and what they want to achieve with their project in order for artificial intelligence to support the portfolio process. So over to you, everybody.
Christina, can you please allow me to share my screen?
You should be able to do that, Alexander.
All right, now it's possible. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'll be starting to present while Alexander will go through the slides for a while. We want to first a little talk about how we apply ePortfolios to teacher education at the University of Education of Weingarten. Especially how we use them for assessment. We are building a system. ISOP is a project that aims at delivering a prototype service. So we will be describing an architecture, a technical architecture, on how this is happening, and we'll be demonstrating this. There are an amount of picky subjects around this. So the first picky subject is going to be privacy, which certainly is a concern to many. But probably bigger is trustworthiness, especially bigger for the users and the applications. Formative evaluation is the first step of experiments that we have, of which we are going to be presenting the result with a few conclusions. Let's start with how we use portfolios. The idea for students, so those are mostly students that are close to education, either they will be teachers or there will be support teams for teachers. They want to document their course knowledge. And you could say that this is basically close to reproduction, but it's quite often much deeper in terms of documenting an appropriation of the learning process. Portfolios very often come with realization. It could be a software project, it could be an interview, a usability test or something. And all these realizations need to be expressed as part of the portfolio. The idea of this portfolio is after that it serves as an evidence for the student of how many things they have learned. And this is probably their best notes of the course afterwards. But there is a teacher perspective to this. We want to use this as a preparation for exam. We want to be able to assess what are the competencies, how big is the knowledge of the students using portfolios. And you can do that with completeness. You can do that with the depth of processing of a reflection, the originality, how much has been reflected and attempted, and so on. And then one classical way that you can ask yourself the question is how big, how broad is the subject that they have demonstrated within their portfolios. Next slide. The classic thing that is done in the course starts with, sorry, I'm gonna. Starts with just having courses that need to be aggregated. They need to be thought into one head. They need to be aggregated in terms of practice, in terms of literature, in terms of media. All these things typically are aggregated within a portfolio by the student through his or her head. And this aggregation can happen within the portfolio. Normally at the University of Education of Weingarten, we do this with what's called a module, which is a pack of 2 or 3 courses which are related to each other. Of course, relation is actually very, very much desired. The production of the portfolio then follows a preparation for the exam. We want a few days before the exam at latest to have the portfolio, and then use this as a basis for an oral exam. The assessment can then be done both at the level of questions by the exam and at the level of the portfolio. And this gives the portfolio into the breadth. This gives then the oral presentation into the pointy things. Next slide. Right. Let's compare maybe our project to the classical approach. One thing that we found to be classical is this field guide of ePortfolios that the ABL website displays, and one of the papers there is about learning analytics. So we are interested especially to collecting data, but we want to do this in a much more careful way than the global learning analytics greedy thing that gathers everything and then asks itself the question much later, what am I going to do with the data? The learning analytics very often will gather as much as possible as data without interpretation, and will, and for example, the paper shows that you can do a lot of different things based on the data, whereas here in ISOP we want to focus on 2 or 3 small objectives, namely support the evaluation for teachers, support the evaluation for students, and do this and possibly support the evaluation of the course for teachers afterwards. That means that those are the small objectives that we focus on, and we have to apply, for example, what's in the GDPR's called data minimization, where we only collect what is necessary, the rest is left. One other approach which is currently applied in our system, and maybe it holds, maybe it does not hold on the long run, we only collect data when it is requested. And that means that after this data can go away, there is no concern of long-term tracking that can be thought of. And this is an important concept for ethics and privacy, which we try to include into the design from the start on, into, for example, the workflows of users. Next slide. Why do we aim to automate feedback? Well, one of the things that typically we want to be able to offer is that the students need to have a small diagnostics on their individual ePortfolios, need to have an information on what they could, for example, complete in terms of depth or in terms of breadth. For teachers, we want to provide an assistance for the evaluation, because the evaluation is often a very long process. And if you want to make it very thorough, you will see the rubric later on, we have the need for very detailed information, and sometimes it needs to go back again and again through the portfolio. Going back in a supported fashion is, we think, something that is going to be useful. It's useful to support the detailed criteria, and to support the large number of ePortfolios which are typically run and evaluated in a small time so far with the process we have been running. One thing that that is challenging in all that is that the assessment can only be done by subject matter experts. That means that also our training has to be done. Our AI has to be aware of the subject-specific knowledge. I give the floor to Sandra to speak about the rubrics and how we evaluate portfolios.
Okay, so here you can see an extract of our rubrics that we use for assessing e-portfolios. So we use e-portfolios in introductory courses for information technology and computer science courses. We have developed a rubric containing 12 criteria. So they are categorized into content-related aspects, also formal aspects such as design, layout, or also the use of digital media. And we also have a category related to the reflection of the learning processes. So every criteria is described on different levels of performance. So we have we distinguish 4 performance levels, ranging from beginner level over intermediate to advanced and proficient level. We use ePortfolio since a couple of years now, so this rubrics is very well tested and focused on the use in our courses. But as you can imagine, when you have this whole list of criteria, it's really time consuming to do this assessment for every portfolio, especially if you have very large groups of students.
All right. I would like to explain how we designed the automated analysis and the components involved, and actually how is assessment done in our system. On the left-hand side, you can see our 2 target groups, which are students and teachers. And as a result of the automated analysis in the center, they are presented with role-specific dashboards on the right-hand side. And they can gain some interesting insights about the portfolios. And for example, students can then further improve their portfolio in an iterative way. And lecturers can review and assess the portfolios mostly in a summative way at the end of the semester. But what actually happens here in the center during analysis? The automated analysis is basically a collection of software modules, or you could say software scripts, that aim to measure the diverse criteria defined in the rubrics Sandra has mentioned before. For example, one aspect of the depth and completeness of the portfolio is the number and coverage of all concepts or topics of the seminar. For this, we use artificial intelligence. To be more concrete, it's text classification to identify the concepts a student writes about in his or her portfolio. However, to train this text classifier, a few steps were necessary in advance. First of all, we built a concept map to model the underlying domain knowledge of the course. This acts as expert knowledge or expert model. And then we selected learning resources like slides, books, and websites, but also portfolios of previous semesters, and extracted the text snippets from them. And in an annotation process, we enriched these text snippets by using the concept of the concept map or the expert model. And with this training data, we were able to train a text classifier that is able to identify the concepts in a foreign text in a completely new portfolio based on previously learned data. So what we do now here is when, for example, a student asks for an analysis, we download his or her portfolio, run the text classifier, which identify the concepts. And based on these findings, we can say, for example, what concepts are in the portfolio, which are missing, where are overlapping concepts, and so on. And this provides insights into specific expertise, knowledge gaps, special interests. And we can also use this concept map for navigation inside the portfolio. I will show you this in a minute. There is also the idea to compare the portfolio of a student with a larger set of portfolio, which is, for example, the group's performance. We have developed a web application, and I would briefly like to explain how we set up the system landscape. Our university is running a Moodle system which directly links to Mahara, which is using a single sign-on system. And what we did is, for experiments, we set up the same Mahara system on our server, which is located in Germany. And we now know how to modify the university's Mahara system that it can work with our system. So this gives us the possibility to do the software management out of our hands and respect the privacy regulations, because our server is running in Germany. And yeah, this section here is about that we are running a Node.js web server for the technical guys here in our meeting. All right, but let's go to, or let me quickly change the window. Let's go for the live presentation. Both students and teachers start on the homepage of our website, and we use the OAuth protocol to let students log into ISOP via Mahara. Here I am asked by Mahara whether ISOP may have access to user details and portfolios. And now I'm logged in to our ISOP system. After arriving in the application, as a student, I could analyze my views here, for example, which are listed here. Some of them are anonymized. I will say some words about it in a second. And some have not creative names, but I think the idea gets clear. Because today I'm in the role of a teacher, I will scroll down a little bit. And what we did in ISOP is to manage the access to students' portfolios with the help of Mahara groups. And because I'm an administrator to all of these groups, I can open them. And this one has the suffix it's a terrible word. It was anonymized. So this group contains the users and portfolios of our latest examination in an anonymous way. It was anonymized because we used all these portfolios to further train our AI model. And this is also helpful for our presentation because I'm not allowed to show personal data. So I'm now in the group and I can access a group-wide report and open the individual group members. Let's start with the letter. I will open a single user, which is also, of course, anonymized. And when I open a group member, I can see his or her dashboard and displaying all of his views. I'm assuming to be a teacher of computer science. That's why I open this view. I have to move the Zoom window. Here we go. And I presented a short report summarizing the central results of the analysis. For example, a summary of the concepts used, a simple word. I can see how the student has built up his portfolio with different Mahara blocks and a list of hyperlinks. I have to admit this is still in a prototype version because there are missing some visualizations below. What is even more interesting is the portfolio viewer. Let me close this one here for a second. First of all, you will see the portfolio delivered by Mahara and which was enriched during analysis. For example, when I hover a paragraph of the portfolio, I can see the results of the text classification. In this case, the classification thinks that the paragraph is about fundamental principles, which is absolutely correct. Here, this paragraph is about representing numbers in different number systems. Let's scroll down a bit. Here it is about encoding and encryption, encoding information in transmissions, for example, but also we all have something about data compression and error control while working with this data, and so on. But what kind of analysis do we have here on the left side? First of all, you can see the concept map I have mentioned before in my presentation. We used it to model the domain knowledge of the course. And the special thing is about this CMap is that it's highly interactive, which means that, for example, when I scroll on the right side, then the respective nodes get highlighted in this visualization. I can also click a node and get transported to the first occurrence. and can further navigate between all the findings where the concept encoding was identified. Below there, I have some other results. For example, can jump to the paragraph with the highest rating or lowest rating, can inspect the related concepts, which is, for example, saying here that encoding was found 21 times with compression. Okay, what else do we have here? We have, for example, an automatically built table of contents. We are planning to analyze the APA references. We can jump to different Mahara blocks. For example, you can build your portfolio with text blocks and image blocks and interactive media like YouTube videos. You could also jump to different tables if you want. All right, let's go back to the group again. We are currently working on the aggregation of the individual portfolio analysis to create an overall group report. And here we have a special thing at our university, as Paul has mentioned before. It is common practice for students to create portfolios for several courses, but they are assessed within a single module, or you could say a single group in our case. For this reason, we have created a seminar, the concept of a seminar, to sort and analyze the portfolios thematically. So, for example, I have created a seminar for the computer science course and one for object programming. And this gives us the possibility to batch analyze multiple Mahara views and create a seminar report. So I can open this seminar and will be presented with a report, which is at this time very simple. It's only about words, word count and lexical density, but we are currently planning to implement highly or more elaborated visualizations like this one, listing all the seminar members and their concepts. We are planning to implement text features like text similarity and text diversity, and also readability features. The next big goal is to implement not only a comparison of a student with the seminar, but also a comparison of multiple students with each other, comparing to peers. All right. I know I have spoken very fast to be in time, and I'm happy to, if you have questions, maybe now or later. Otherwise, I will jump back to our presentation and give the word to Sandra.
To me.
To Paul, sorry. Paul, are you muted?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You have a concrete view of how our system works. That means that now starts the serious things about data privacy, and potentially we want to come to a spot where we feel safe about that. Some people, some fashion really tell you AI is the end of the privacy, and in a sense, it's true if your data is flowing on every possible places. You have this big brother feeling that everyone is feeling, but it's really a matter of data flow. It's true that if you use free APIs, then it's very likely that the data is going to be used into training sets that go far broader than actually the small scope of the application you are going to make. So that means that's the first necessary step, is to go for local models that you manage the business model of, models that you train yourself, models that not necessarily allow data to be going away. Part of the GDPR, which is a permanent threat, is that there can always be suddenly a fear that the data is going away in a place that is inappropriate, and the data needs to be retractable. in the data being retractable or correctable, actually, means that we have to permanently care for this possibility of retraction. It may mean, for example, to train again the model because some of the portfolio data has been removed from our training sets. This kind of things is acceptable. We need to work with that. And unfortunately, we cannot say that that in a portfolio content is unpersonal. You can run a process of anonymizing. Alex showed a little bit this process, but this requires a human to actually assert that this anonymization is done. We have automatic support for this, but that's not enough. Training annotators are typically people which are subject matters expert and subject matters experts which are local, so that they work on private data and they don't suffer from the anonymization process that makes the text less readable or harder to understand. The data privacy is a big monster topic, and probably this is something that has the biggest lever on the IT infrastructure at the universities, because universities have this mandate to apply the biggest privacy standards. What's super important in all that is this clear authorization dialogue. We didn't see that in the demo, but the first time that you meet to ISOP, you are invited to go to Mahara, get the authorization of how much data you can see in Mahara, you need to be able to see also in ISOP. This authorization dialogue is fundamental, and this is certainly something that needs the best dressing so that the people feel that their data is not going too far away and they have a trust into giving the authorization. Otherwise, what you break is not only the trust into the external application, you break the trust into the portfolio system, which is even worse. Next slide. In ISOP, we try to make it a proof that it is doable. We use open source models that run AI on a local thing. We didn't meet the big GPU problem so far. So that made, because we used also pre-trained models which are generic in nature. So we are able here to run this into a small system where the training has been, I think, less than a few minutes, I think. We interface to LMS with this authorization, with this OAuth process. And one of the principles that has been valid so far is that the web app is just a temporary service provider. As long as you are interested to get the feedback, then you can have this. So what we try to make is a clear dialogue, a clear content dialogue, consent. What we try to obtain is the trust of the university IT, and what we try to do is only use things that have been authorized for. It may break. So of course, if they have the feeling that they are being continuously watched, the students, then there will be a problem, or it might be a problem. One example where you can go wrong is actually show to the whole classroom the analysis of a personal portfolio. It may break if we start to use external services. And this is something that we always wanted to do and have always retracted to do. Picture recognition, for example, of code pictures, screenshots, and so on. That's important, and it may break. The same is true if you don't have trustable analysis. I've copied this toot on the right. When you see privacy-aware people, you often see in front of them people who just say, "Okay," and we are having a bright future with this new LLMs. I mean, this is the classical thing currently. So why are we currently restrained into discussing privacy? And there's always a clever person who just says, "Who cares? Privacy is lost anyways." Well, we aim at showing that it's not completely lost. Sandra.
Okay, so I will continue with trustworthiness. So in addition to considering privacy, data privacy issues, we also aim at building a trustworthy AI-based system, which is in line with established ethic guidelines like the ones we see here, which are defined by the high-level expert group on AI by the European Commission. So one requirement of these guidelines is to support human agency and oversight. So in ISOP, we use a human in command model, which lets the control with the students and the teachers. So they decide when to use our tool and how to use it. As you've just seen in the demo, it is intended that you use these ISOP dashboard and the portfolio viewer as an augmentation of the actual ePortfolio content. So what we're trying to do is to enhance the manual assessment by such objective measurements such as text metrics or the results of the NLP analysis. We also look at technical robustness and safety. So what we did is to compare different performance metrics in different types of machine learning models and chose the one that best fits our needs for ePortfolio analysis. So we aim at building a reliable and reproducible system in order to exactly describe how the system behaves. Another very important requirement is transparency. So we did a very detailed documentation of the data collection and labeling processes and also of the applied algorithms. This is important to know how the data was labeled, based on which information, and if there were any conflicts, how they were resolved. The next thing, explainability, is also very, very relevant to our approach of building dashboards and basing our analysis on the assessment criteria in our rubrics. So what we need to achieve is to map the assessment criteria in the rubrics to these visualizations and explain to the teachers or the students using them how this mapping is performed and how to interpret these visualizations. This also leads to the next point, which is diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. So an important measure in this respect is to involve all the stakeholders that are affected by the system, which are teachers and students in our case. So we involve them throughout the design and development process and collect feedback from them as soon as possible. As you've seen, we have trained our machine learning models based on real-life ePortfolio data. So our target with the results that we provide is not to streamline the ePortfolio contents, but really to focus human attention to unusual parts of the ePortfolios, also maybe missing contents, so that we are attracted to the interesting parts of the ePortfolio that shows the strengths and the individual specializations of the ePortfolios. Okay, so we did a first evaluation of our system and of the annotation process. So we had students building their ePortfolios in the University Mahara. They exported the ePortfolios and we used them to import them into our Research Mahara system, which included all the NLP pipeline and also the ISOP web application that we just saw. So the lecturers were evaluating the ePortfolios using the ISOP web app and using the interactive navigation of the ePortfolio viewer. What we found was that NLP technologies are definitely ready for this usage. So the assessment of topic coverage was faster using this innovative navigation facilities. What we also found was that the annotations that need to be done manually are very context specific. So you need to know about the specific contents of the courses that apply these analysis features. And it will also be the case when we use larger models for analyzing the ePortfolio texts. A very big challenge for us is still to link the rubrics and the dashboard. So this is a strong requirement of the teachers to really see how the rubrics and the dashboard visualizations fit together, how they link. So this is where we're working on and where we do many tests to have a working solution there. Performance-wise, the system worked fine, but we noticed when we do the analysis of many portfolios, it's good to have a batch process in place where you do the analysis in one go and then look at the visualizations.
It's on me. This is the last slide. Our conclusion is we believe that it is possible to support the assessment, both for students and for teachers. I mean, our system is not the most mature system yet, and it's specific to our courses so far, but we believe it has been demonstrated. We insist that we provide a visualization, which is not an automatic summary, which is not an automatic assessment. These are strategies that have been often done. I think here we try to present something more detached and potentially more traceable, more transparent. It's important, we feel, that teachers should be the ones still in the commands. I think we've a little bit explained the ongoing work. The workflow between portfolio, the rubrics, and the visualization is something that can be matured a lot. It is also specific, but it can be also much easier transported to some other places. That means that we want potentially more visualizations, more interaction schemes. And last, but maybe not least, one of the things that might help us into getting a bigger trust is that we are currently working on e-learning bylaws that would transparently allow any student to export their data to systems that others trust. And for example, including data for research purposes, providing we do the proper anonymization. Thank you. I think we can go to the next slide where you have our URL. We have our open source license as well. If you are somewhere close to Germany, we recommend that you present your paper to our ePeopleR workshop. It is now time for us to say, please come on with questions.
Thank you so much, Sandra, Paul, and Alexander, for this summary of where you are currently at with the ISO project. And I think for the discussion, so for the last roughly 10-12 minutes, I'll stop the screen share so that it's a bit easier to see who has a question and who wants to ask a question. I definitely have a few, but I would like to see if anybody else in the room would like to start us off with a question. If that's not the case right now, my question is, you kind of finished with the findings so far, with your conclusions, and you did mention that, I think it was Sandra, you did mention that you had some instructors look at the feedback that had been provided, and also mentioned that the NLP technology is pretty good already. Have you also already had some student feedback?
No, not yet, because we have started with the teacher dashboard. So this is the one who was under evaluation. So we don't have the student dashboard designed yet, and so we don't have feedback for that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And so actually a follow-on question then for that, unless somebody else has one.
There has been a little bit student questions, so we requested this authorization also to transfer these to our experimental system. That's why we didn't bring them to this experimental Mahara. But one of the surprising comments of one student was about anonymization. That student was bothered by anonymizing her portfolio when going to the corpus, because it's her work. She wants to be cited. And that really surprised us, I must say.
With the lecturer feedback that you have received, can the lecturers, and I suppose they are all computer science instructors, how can they envisage using that in their classes going forward? Have you already asked them that question?
I think we have done so. Maybe I can try to answer. Alexandra, please enrich that. We have seen a few things that would be really useful. One example that would be really useful is to show in the classroom the amount of, for example, words or concepts that become covered as a graph, as a timely graph, to tell them, you know, the exam is 2 weeks away. It's time now to start writing to the portfolio. That's a very simple summary that we can present, and that is certainly going to be helpful. We are very scared, however, by this showing the general, the personal information to the classroom. So so far we have not tried to show individual things, but it does happen that. We show individual works of the students to the classroom. Individual portfolios is really rare, as far as I know. I think, Alex, I didn't remember having done that at all.
No.
Does anybody else have questions? Florentina.
I'm curious if pseudonymization would be an answer to this conflict between anonymization and the interest to show your work, that it's nearly impossible to anonymize work because there could also be personal information in it. Did you think about that, or if pseudonymization could be a way to solve the problem?
So again, correct me, Alex, I believe what we call anonymization is actually pseudonymization. So we do put a fancy number on the back of it. And this is indeed not true anonymization. The problem with true anonymization is bound to the recipient. So if this goes into the hands of Google or Microsoft or Apple, then they will have much more extra information to cooperate with, to match with, and that means then that the privacy is the problem. So far, the scope has been only with our users, with, for example, a presentation like here, and their anonymization is far enough. So pseudonymization, I'm sorry, is far enough. Whether we could do pseudonymization to, for example, show in the classroom, so far it needs manual checking, so that would be an extra step, but that could be something that is possible. If if you have so much contact with the students that you have been listening to the students' questions and so on, when you see the portfolio, I think you recognize the person right away, even with completely anonymized text. So I think here the scope is not so important.
Thank you.
Lucia, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great presentation. I'm not from a computer science background, but it's mainly from the student perspective I'm coming. I'm trying to get to grips with, you were talking about the text classifier. Yes, I guess that. I'm trying to figure out in terms of So you're saying, you know, the concept map and that, you know, how much they have engaged with it. How are you judging that in terms of what is the student doing? Is it a journal entry, or is it that they have viewed, is a view counted as engagement? Is what I'm trying to figure out the measurement of it. Or is it a journal entry that it's picking out words that they have used? How is that being analysed in terms of their engagement?
Alex, do you want to try to answer that?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I think Lucia wants to ask the question, how are we measuring engagement? I think that question is a very broad question, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think some of the measures. So we try to go from this request to measure engagement to concrete measures that would be measured within the text. And normally we try to use only the text. You could use a lot of learning analytics, for example, traces of usages and this kind of things if they were available. But we tried to focus here on text alone.
When you say that, Paul, do you mean, sorry for interrupting, when you say the text, is that a journal entry that the student is after typing into the ePortfolio? When you say the text?
Yeah. This is the portfolio entry that we're talking about. So those are in Mahara, those are called portfolio is a collection of views, and then views are basically pages. If you want to do a journal kind of approach, you would make one view per day or one view per journal entry.
Okay, so it's matching the words that they've used. Okay, in the entry. Perfect.
This is correct. This is correct. And then one thing that you can implement there is to, for example, see that they've used small soft synonyms. This is a good example where they have, appropriate the things to themselves. And because we are using these large language models, the fact that two words are soft synonyms is easily, applicable. So we have trained for example, for encoding, but things like character set or things like a few other names that represent this idea of encoding, they all come with.
Okay, and sorry, one last question I want to ask you. So that's on the text side, that it's analyzing that. So say a student who has been really good with the digital media side, the videos and the images and all of that. So a student that uses more digital media than another student, how are they being rated? Is there something for, if I use more video, that's a better ePortfolio than somebody who didn't use video at all?
That's linear consideration. So no linear consideration down here. We have a section that says that you use more videos. That the problem with videos is that quite often these are embeds from YouTube because they find it more comfortable, and that means that they are not so easily recognizable. Normally, if the students have used the standard means, it works. If they use funky means, then it's broken. So there is a few technical challenges down there. But the fact that the students use video for us makes it that they use the video, and if it's a well-known video, for example, that it might be recognized. For example, we might know the topic and some other students might be using this. But if this is a self-built video, then either we know it or either we look at it, but so far we haven't been processing into an analysis of this. So ideally we should fetch the text of that video, for example, for performing NLP. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Questions? My question goes to workload. You did mention earlier that the classification is done by humans to make sure that the connections are correct. Have you already started modeling how the automatic feedback, initial feedback, would impact the workload of an instructor who were to use this tool in their classes? Have the instructors given you some feedback on that already, if that is helpful to them? Or because you also mentioned that you're trying to focus the attention on the unusual things, on the things that might otherwise not get picked up by a human. Have your instructors remarked on that? Do they think that it will help them? Giving their own feedback to the students.
I think one thing that we try to do is to give concrete analysis and then let the user look at the concrete analysis, and because of this they have a different perspective on the portfolio. So for example, originality you could see by seeing the differences between portfolios, so within one cohort. Feedback, experimental feedback based on that, I think we mostly have about the topic recognition, which is the thing that we have been experimenting with. All the other visualizations that we start to have about the cohorts have not been experimented with yet. But I think, Alex, it's true that we definitely have this expectation that this will work. Recognize originality is going to be working, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is mostly a vision you brought up, Paul, saying that when a lecturer realizes in the CMAP and in the analysis that some topics are missing in the student's portfolio, that the lecturer can come back to his class and ask whether there are problems in understanding of this topic, and why there are some details missing.
Right. So currently you're looking at the feedback as an aggregate across the entire class, so that it's not necessarily only feedback to an individual student, but also feedback for the instructor to take back to a class and check on their knowledge of understanding or where they are as a group, so that they can use that as further point of instruction.
Yes. I mean, this is an formative approach, and we are hoping that lecturers find their time to use our tools in the middle of the semester. And basically, but it was planned to be a summative tool, but yes, it can be also used formative.
Penny has been asking or suggesting that doing a systematization or doing a systematics of quantity-based systematics of what is unsupported by the teacher intuition would be useful. Yeah, I guess so, but so far you definitely don't want to be even more original. So I think doing a work such as, for example, showing a list of originalities is likely to be biased and not complete and not trustable. But having this an ability, for example, to share the view, to show to a colleague, look, this student has been doing this weird thing. I think this is the kind of thing where we think we are aiming at. We are going to assess the originality. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I think that really takes us now to the end before Europe needs to head off to the next meetings. Unfortunately, Sandra already had to leave us a few minutes ago for one of hers. So please do provide digital applause to Alexander, Paul, and Sandra for introducing us to their project, ISOP, that is looking at how to support the feedback giving and also the assessment of portfolios to students. And thank you also, Alexander, for having braved a live demo there so that we could see it. And I'm sure that all those who did not already speak German here on the call this morning will have picked up some new words to look up or maybe put through an AI checker. So thank you so much, everybody, for having come along. I did put in some links to upcoming events. The ABLE Task Force and also ePortfolios Australia and ePortfolio Ireland will be hosting a webinar next month, so on the 27th of June, on a series of articles that were recently published, of course, on the topic of portfolios. And in August, we will be having our annual meeting. And I did also put in the call for proposals for the Delphi Tagung that Paul had mentioned, which is taking place in September in Fulda, for anybody who would like to come along, discuss portfolios and AI, or maybe also present their own AI project. So thanks, everybody. Good morning and good evening. And I look forward to seeing you at another event. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.